She only wanted to see a necklace, but before she could even get a closer look, the store manager's expression hardened. Moments later, the police were on their way. Then, her father arrived. With a single motion, he pulled out his FBI badge, and just like that the entire room fell into stunned silence. Madeline Carter pushed open the heavy glass doors of Westwood Jewelers, stepping into the cool, refined air of the boutique. The subtle blend of polished wood and expensive cologne surrounded her, a stark contrast to the uncertainty gnawing at her stomach. Beneath the dazzling glow of crystal chandeliers, rows of diamond rings, delicate gold chains, and sapphire-studded bracelets shimmered inside pristine glass cases. She hesitated for a moment, tugging at the sleeves of her oversized hoodie, then took a steady breath and walked toward the counter. This wasn't exactly a place that welcomed people like her. But she wasn't about to let that stop her. For months, she had worked tirelessly tutoring restless middle schoolers, stocking shelves at the tiny bookstore down the street, saving every penny for this moment. Her mother deserved something beautiful, and today she was finally going to buy it. But even before she spoke, she could feel the weight of their stares. Across the room, behind a sleek marble counter, store manager Linda Prescott stiffened the moment Madeline walked in. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and she leaned toward one of the younger sales clerks. "Watch her," she murmured under her breath. Madeline wasn't naive. She'd been through this before, those polite smiles that never reached the eyes, the way employees tracked her every move like she was seconds away from causing trouble. She could almost hear their silent judgments. Does she even belong here? Can she actually afford anything? But she squared her shoulders and kept walking, refusing to let their scrutiny shake her. At the far end of the counter, a well-dressed older couple admired a sapphire bracelet, whispering excitedly. A teenage girl, not much older than Madeline, giggled as she and her mom tried on matching gold necklaces. No one watched them with suspicion. But the moment Madeline stopped in front of the glass case, the change in atmosphere was unmistakable. The sharp click of Linda Prescott's heels echoed as she approached. Her expression remained professional, but the way her eyes flicked over Madeline's casual hoodie and worn sneakers spoke volumes. "Can I help you find something specific?" she asked, her voice carefully polite but distant. Madeline caught the hesitation. The unspoken suggestion, "Maybe you shouldn't be here." She didn't flinch. "Yeah," she said evenly. "I'm looking for a necklace for my mom's birthday." Linda's lips pressed together in a tight line. "I see. We carry a variety of pieces. Some of them are quite high-end." There it was, the assumption. Madeline swallowed down her irritation and leaned forward slightly, pointing at a delicate diamond pendant resting on a thin white gold chain. "How much is this one?" Linda didn't even glance down. Instead, she let out a soft, almost amused breath. "That's a certified diamond pendant. It starts at $6,000. Madeline met her gaze, unblinking. "Okay, can I see it?" The hesitation was small but undeniable. Linda's fingers twitched as though debating whether it was even worth unlocking the case. A second too long passed in silence before she finally reached for the set of keys at her waist. But before she could turn the lock, a hand lightly touched her arm. A younger sales associate, a woman with sleek brown hair, leaned in and murmured something under her breath. Linda paused, her gaze flicked back to Madeline, and just like that, her decision was made. "Excuse me for just a moment," she said smoothly, already turning away. But her real destination wasn't the stockroom or another display case. It was the store phone. Madeline watched as Linda picked up the receiver, her voice dipping into a hushed, deliberate tone. The shift in the room was impossible to ignore. A man in a navy suit at the security desk glanced up, his gaze lingering. Another sales associate, a young woman with nervous eyes, shifted from foot to foot, sneaking glances at Madeline like she was a ticking bomb. Madeline exhaled slowly. All she had done was ask to see a necklace. Yet somehow she had become a problem. And she had no idea just how far they were about to take it. The air inside Westwood Jewelers grew heavier. A minute ago, no one had paid her much attention. Now, every movement, every breath, felt scrutinized. The older couple by the sapphire bracelet had gone quiet, their earlier excitement replaced by uneasy glances. The teenage girl with the gold necklace hesitated, shifting uncomfortably before looking away. The employees exchanged glances. A silent, knowing look passed between them as if they were all in on something she wasn't. But Madeline wasn't stupid. Linda Prescott wasn't just making a phone call. She was calling the police. Madeline's jaw tightened. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. For what? She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't touched anything. She hadn't even pulled out her phone. Yet she was the one being treated like a criminal. She couldn't hear Linda's exact words, but the woman's posture told her everything she needed to know. Her voice was clipped, efficient, like she was filing a report, a serious one. Then, after a final, quiet exchange, she set the receiver down and turned back, her smile practiced, effortless. "Sorry about that," Linda said smoothly. "You were asking about the pendant." Madeline didn't move. She could hear the rush of blood in her ears, feel the weight of every stare pressing down on her. "What did you just do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. Linda's expression didn't falter, but something colder flickered behind her eyes. "Excuse me," Madeline's throat tightened. She knew this game, the kind where the rules were already set against her. Where it didn't matter how polite she was, how still she stood, she was already guilty in their eyes. "You called the police," she said, her voice sharper now, cutting through the suffocating quiet. Linda let out a soft, polished laugh, the kind designed to dismiss and defuse. "That's quite an accusation." Madeline didn't miss the way the other employees shifted uncomfortably. Even they knew this had gone too far, and then the front door swung open. A uniformed police officer stepped inside, his gaze sweeping across the room. His hand rested lightly on his belt, posture firm but unreadable. The store fell silent. Madeline felt something heavy settle in her chest, but she forced herself to stand tall. The officer's eyes landed on Linda first, who immediately straightened, her smile smooth and somehow relieved. "Officer, thank you for coming," she said crisply. "We had a situation." The way she said it sent an icy chill through Madeline's spine. The officer gave a brief nod before turning his attention to her. "Miss, I'm going to need to ask you a few questions." Madeline swallowed against the burning tightness in her throat. She refused to let them see her falter. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady. The officer's brow creased slightly, as if confused by the question. "We received a call about a suspicious individual." Madeline let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to a laugh. "I walked in. I asked to see a necklace." The officer's gaze flicked to Linda, who gave him the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. The message was clear. He turned back to Madeline. "Do you have an ID on you?" Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. She already knew where this was headed. A police officer questioning a 17-year-old girl in a jewelry store. She'd be asked to explain herself, why she was there, what she wanted, if she could actually afford anything. And even if she answered every question perfectly, it still might not be enough. Madeline took a slow, measured breath. "I want to call my father," she said. For the first time, Linda's expression faltered just for a fraction of a second. She hadn't expected that. The officer hesitated, then exhaled through his nose. "Go ahead." Madeline's fingers flew over the screen, dialing the number she knew by heart. The moment the call connected, she didn't even wait for him to say hello. "Dad," she said, her voice tight. "I need you to come to Westwood Jewelers, right now." She heard the shift in his tone instantly. "I'm on my way," he said. Then the line went dead. But no one in that store was ready for who was about to walk through that door. The silence stretched, thin and brittle, like glass about to shatter. The officer shifted slightly, adjusting his stance, his arms crossing over his chest. His face was unreadable. Linda stood tall, her polished smile still in place, but something about her had changed her posture a little too rigid, her hands smoothing over the front of her blouse as if trying to hold on to control. Madeline, however, didn't flinch. She stood her ground, eyes locked onto the officer's, refusing to shrink under his gaze. Then the front door chimed. And in an instant, the energy in the room shifted so sharply it was almost suffocating. A man stepped inside. Dark suit, perfectly tailored. Not overly tall, but he carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that made him seem larger than life. He didn't have to say a word. His presence alone was enough to command attention. His sharp gaze swept across the store, missing nothing. The officer, the employees, the weight of the tension hanging in the air. Madeline exhaled. Dad. Linda's face lost a shade of color, but she recovered quickly, straightening. Sir, I. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather badge holder, flipping it open with practiced ease. The gold shield inside caught the light, gleaming under the showroom's bright chandeliers. FBI Director James Carter. The weight of the title settled over the store like an invisible force, pressing down on everyone in the room. The officer blinked. One of the sales associates let out a tiny gasp before clapping a hand over her mouth. And Linda, she went completely still. James Carter's voice was measured, steady, but beneath it, there was an unmistakable edge. Someone want to explain to me why my 17-year-old daughter just called me in distress from a jewelry store. Silence. Madeline watched as Linda struggled to find her voice. The same woman who had been so confident, so sure of herself just moments ago, now looked like she wanted to disappear. Finally, she cleared her throat. Director Carter, this is just a misunderstanding. James's sharp gaze flicked to the officer. You were called here for a suspicious individual. His tone never wavered, but there was something razor-sharp in the way he said it. Would you like to clarify what exactly made my daughter suspicious? The officer shifted, his eyes darting toward Linda for guidance. But she had nothing. She was drowning now, and she knew it. The air in Westwood Jewelers felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. I want specifics, James said, each word deliberate. Did she steal something? Was she causing a disturbance, threatening anyone? The officer exhaled slowly through his nose. He was cornered. No, sir. James took a measured step forward, his badge still in plain view. So let me get this straight. He let the words settle, let the silence stretch. A 17-year-old girl, shopping for a gift for her mother, asked to see a necklace. And instead of treating her like a customer, she was treated like a criminal. Linda's mouth opened. Linda opened her mouth, closed it again. Madeline watched the realization unfold across her carefully composed face. The slow, dawning understanding that there was no spinning this. No way to claw her way out of the hole she had so confidently dug for herself. But James Carter wasn't finished. Tell me, Miss Prescott, he said, voice still eerily controlled, do you call the police on all your teenage customers? Or just the ones that look like my daughter? The words dropped like a hammer. Madeline held her breath. Linda looked like she had just been slapped. That's not what happened, she stammered. James didn't so much as blink. Then explain what did happen. The room was suffocating now. No one moved, no one spoke. Everyone was waiting for Linda to justify what she had done. Waiting for her to clean up the mess she had created. But there was no fixing this. Because no matter what excuse she gave, the truth was already out in the open. Linda swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. Her hands twitched slightly at her sides. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no corporate-approved script for a situation like this. No rehearsed response that could smooth this over. James Carter stood in front of her, waiting, unmoving, unblinking. James Carter's presence wasn't loud, but it was impossible to ignore. Madeline could see the war playing out in Linda's mind, trying to decide whether to double down or backtrack. She chose the latter. I sincerely apologize if there was any misunderstanding, Linda finally said, her voice carefully measured. I was only acting in the best interest of the store. James didn't so much as twitch. By assuming my daughter was a threat the moment she walked in. Linda shifted, her fingers twisting together in front of her. I didn't assume anything. You just what? James pressed. Linda hesitated. and in that single beat of silence, it was over. She had no real answer. James exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "People like you," he murmured, his voice quieter now but not softer. "You don't even realize the damage you cause." Linda flinched like she'd been struck. James turned his attention to the officer. "I assume there's no actual reason for you to be here." The officer's face remained unreadable, but after a pause, he gave a small shake of his head. "No, sir." James's expression didn't change. "Then I suggest you leave before I start asking why taxpayer money is being wasted on personal bias." The officer stiffened slightly, then gave a curt nod and turned toward the exit. The soft click of the door shutting behind him felt like a final verdict. James Carter turned back to Linda, his gaze unwavering. "I want your district manager's contact information." Linda's face went pale. "Yes, sir, now." The authority in his voice left no room for negotiation. Slowly, stiffly, she reached under the counter, fumbling slightly as she pulled out a business card. Her fingers trembled as she handed it over. James took it without a word, slipping it into his pocket. He didn't need to spell out what would come next. She knew. They all knew. The young sales associate, the one who had whispered to Linda earlier, stood frozen behind the counter, eyes wide, cheeks flushed. Madeline wondered if she regretted saying anything now. James turned to his daughter. "You ready to go?" Madeline hesitated. Her gaze flicked toward the pendant she had originally asked about. James followed her eyes. Then, without missing a beat, he looked back at Linda. "She'd take the necklace." Linda's lips parted slightly. "Sir, You refused to show it to her before." James Carter's voice was final. "Now you will." There was no room for argument. Linda's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the key, unlocking the glass case with quiet, measured movements. She carefully lifted the diamond pendant and placed it on the counter, avoiding Madeline's gaze entirely. Madeline picked it up, rolling it between her fingers. It really was beautiful. James pulled out his wallet and slid a platinum credit card across the counter. "Charge it." Linda barely managed to steady her hands as she ran the transaction. When she handed back the receipt, her fingers brushed against James as she flinched, as if burned. James took the bag, placed it in Madeline's hands, and rested a firm hand on her shoulder. "You should ask yourself if this is the legacy you want to leave behind." And with that, they walked out. But Madeline wasn't done learning just how far the consequences of this moment would reach. The cool evening air met Madeline's skin as they stepped onto the sidewalk. The tension from inside the store still clung to her thick and heavy. But beneath it, there was something else, something closer to relief. James didn't speak right away. He simply walked beside her, his footsteps steady, measured. He had always been this way, letting silence fill the spaces where others would rush to speak. Madeline turned the small shopping bag over in her hands. She had come in wanting to buy a gift, and she was leaving with it. But the excitement was gone. The moment had been tainted. The necklace didn't feel like a celebration anymore. She finally broke the silence. "You didn't have to buy it." James glanced at her. "Yes, I did." Madeline frowned. "Why?" He stopped walking, turning fully to face her. "Because I needed them to see that no matter what they assumed about you, you belong anywhere you choose to be." Madeline swallowed hard, looking down at the bag in her hands. She wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. James placed a hand on Madeline's shoulder. "You did everything right in there." She let out a small, breathy laugh. "Didn't feel like it. That's because you were forced to prove something that should have never been questioned." She nodded, her fingers tightening around the handles of the bag. "I just don't get it. I didn't do anything." James exhaled, his gaze steady. "That's the part people like Linda Prescott will never admit. You didn't have to do anything. You just had to exist." Madeline bit the inside of her cheek, trying to process the weight of that truth. They started walking again, the night air cool against her skin. Before they could reach the car, James's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and let out a short, humorless chuckle. Madeline raised an eyebrow. "What?" He turned the phone toward her. A notification from his FBI email lit up the screen. The subject line was short, but it said everything. Westwood Jewelers formal complaint received. Madeline blinked. Well, that was fast. James slipped the phone back into his pocket. Corporate doesn't like bad press. He met her gaze. And they're about to get a lot of it. Madeline hesitated, her mind spinning with the possibilities. Do you think she'd get fired? James tilted his head slightly. Maybe, maybe not, but this will follow her. Madeline thought about that, how one moment could alter the course of someone's life. How people like Linda only seemed to recognize their mistakes when they were forced to face them. She took a deep breath. Good. James gave her a small nod. Come on, let's go home. As they climbed into the car, Madeline felt something shift inside her. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but there was something else, too. A quiet, unwavering determination. Because for the first time, she understood what had happened in that store wasn't just about her. It was bigger than that, and she wasn't going to forget it. But what happened next would prove just how deep the ripples of this moment would go. Madeline lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the day playing on a loop in her mind. The cold stares, the hushed whispers, the way Linda Prescott had looked right through her like she was nothing more than a problem that needed to be handled. She turned her head, her eyes landing on the small Westwood Jewelers bag sitting on her desk. The pendant was still inside, untouched. She hadn't even taken it out since leaving the store. Her phone buzzed beside her. She reached for it and saw a message from her best friend, Tiana. Tiana, girl, check your Twitter. Now. Madeline frowned, sitting up. She tapped open the app and immediately, her timeline exploded with posts about Westwood Jewelers. Someone had posted a video. She clicked on it. And her own voice rang out from the screen. You called the police. The clip showed everything. The hesitation. The exchanged glances between employees. The exact moment the officer stepped through the door. The captions underneath were already spreading like wildfire. Westwood Jewelers under fire after racial profiling incident. FBI director confronts store over treatment of his daughter. Luxury retailer faces backlash following viral video. Madeline ran a hand down her face. This wasn't just a moment in a store anymore. It had become something bigger. Her door creaked open, and James leaned against the frame. You saw it, Madeline nodded slowly. Yeah. He walked in, sitting at the edge of her bed. How do you feel? Madeline let out a sharp breath, shaking her head as the weight of it all settled over her. Her phone buzzed again, another notification. This one from Westwood Jewelers' official account. We sincerely apologize for today's incident at our Westwood location. The actions taken by our store manager do not reflect our company's values. Effective immediately, she has been placed on administrative leave pending further review. Madeline's fingers hovered over the screen. I guess that's something, she murmured. James didn't look at the phone. He looked at her. This moment matters, he said quietly. What you do with it matters even more. Madeline swallowed, her grip tightening around the phone. James smiled just slightly. Good. She closed her fingers around the necklace, feeling its weight. This wasn't the ending, it was just the beginning. Some battles happen when you least expect them. Some lessons come at a cost. But when you stand your ground, when you refuse to be diminished, you don't just change your story. You change the way the world sees you.